Hello and welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the
show. All right, guys. Hello. Welcome to another Note to File Live. Denali, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Hanging in there for a Tuesday.
Yeah. And we're very pleased to have on Dr. Califf. Dr. Califf, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing okay.
Good.
Suffering from bad weather, though. Everywhere I'm going, it's pouring down rain and lightning and thunder and humid.
Following you around.
Yeah.
I mean, we had that yesterday here. So I'm in Wisconsin. So I feel like that probably is pushing north. So pushing north and east. So you're probably getting what we had yesterday.
So it's your fault.
Is it messing up your travel at all? Or are you making where you need to go?
Travel's been okay. Travel's been good.
Just miserable while you're there.
I was over in Oxford, London and Oxford, England. Last week, it didn't rain a single day I was there. They were amazed. They had all these umbrellas out, but no one had to use them.
Well, very good. We usually open up our show with, letting our guests give an introduction. I do notice, and I want to point out, like you recently or somewhat recently did a sort of an oral history with Duke. Is that right?
Yeah, I did.
I thought that was really cool. So obviously, anyone listening who maybe doesn't know, about Dr. Califf and his background, I would recommend checking that out. I thought it was, again, really compelling. But so instead, if you're okay, I'd like to open it with a couple other questions.
Sure.
One, Mike Krzyzewski, great coach or greatest coach of all time?
I always have trouble with the greatest of all time, but I think most people around would say he's certainly in the top few, and everybody in Durham would say he's the GOAT.
Of course.
My kids grew up at the same time as his kids. We were, you mentioned the oral history. I came to Duke in 1969, and they're having the centennial this year of the university. I've been associated with the university for half of its existence, and they gave me this thing called the University Medal last year, which was especially nice because I got tickets to the UNC football game in the president's box, and nice. Duke pulled out a miraculous victory, which doesn't usually happen in football. It's usually the other way around.
Duke's not necessarily known for football.
No, but yeah, so Coach K is great, and I'm working with him now. He's spending time with our Heart Center at Duke, helping to fundraise and build up interest. I don't know if you've ever heard his inspirational speeches, but they're really, he's one of the top speakers too. He gets people revved up. It's all about more. When he describes how he got all those superstars in the Olympics to work together with all their egos, it really catches people's attention.
Yeah, I'm sure that was easy, right? Getting all those guys to work together. Very good. All right. Well, question 2. Let's, this is a clinical research podcast, so I want to jump in. So as far as the clinical research landscape, how fucked are we right now? All right. There's a lot of things going on. How much trouble are we in?
Well, it's one of those things, I'm out now for about 4 months back as a civilian. So people actually talk to me like a regular person. When you're a commissioner, you don't get the same candid input. People are usually representing some interest, trying to get something done. And what I would say is the theory has never been as good and advanced for the learning health system, which is what we really need. But the practice has actually noticeably gone the wrong direction. And my metric there is, it was a decade ago that I left clinical research and academic practice and clinical care to go to the FDA the first time. And, that was a 2-year stint. And then I spent 5 years at Alphabet and then with some research things back at the university, then came back to FDA. So it's really been 10 years since I've been in the fray. So I've been diving in, and it's not good right now in the U.S. in particular, and I'm sure we can get into the reasons for that.
That was going to be, I want to get into that. I also want to know what drew you to the FDA to begin with. like when you left clinical practice, when you left research the first time 10 years ago? Like what about you're like, yeah, I want to do this. This is the right path for me.
Well, as an academic, as I think I started out in coronary care, and the first year of being the attending in the coronary care unit was the year some enterprising cardiologists did some angiograms, and we didn't know what caused heart attacks until that year. And there was a big blood clot sitting in the coronary artery of people having heart attacks. So the integration of clinical research with practice was always part of what I did, ultimately leading to these very large international clinical trials where we were the data center because back in the 70s, we had computing at Duke that almost no other academic center had. That's all changed now. Everybody's got computing, of course, but
Yeah.
for you youngsters, there actually was a time when all medical records were handwritten. That's the way it was when I came through. So this was revolutionary. So we were coordinating clinical trials, trying to figure out what to do about heart attack and unstable angina and heart failure. And that led to submissions to the FDA jointly with the medical products industry. So I had gotten to know almost everybody at FDA one way or another. And literally what happened was Peggy Hamburg flew down one day and said, I'm getting ready to step down. She had done 6 years, which is a long time in that job.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you should think about, whether you can be next. But of course, the president has to ask you. It's not up to the outgoing commissioner.
Right.
But at that point, I just sort of peaked out, I felt, in my academic role. And so I went up as a civil servant, spent a year as Deputy Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco. So I was full-time government, big cut in pay, but a really clear mission. And it was great. Then Obama, asked me to be commissioner, and things happened after that. But the initial attraction was just, I've always seen the FDA as the ultimate referee of evidence and medical practice. And I admire that. I love statistics in sports, and in many ways they're analogies with what the FDA does. So one other thing to mention, which, for this audience, I had come along during the Vietnam War. Many of my classmates served in the military. It was the time of the draft, which, by the way, I just want to put in a plug for national service. I think we desperately need national service, whether it's military or other, for a whole bunch of reasons. But I didn't serve, so I had always felt it was the right thing to do to serve in government at some point. So I sort of jumped at the opportunity.
Fair. You touched on something in the beginning there that I think I've heard you talk about before, but sort of the integration of research into clinical care. I'm really interested in your thoughts about this. We see now clinical research being referred to as a care option by organizations, businesses, whatever the case may be. I guess what are your thoughts in that regard? Is clinical research a care option, or should it be more clearly distinguished or distinct from clinical care? I mean, I'm sure you're, as someone who's been a PI, well aware of the pitfalls of conflating the two.
Well, I see the pitfalls on the other side as being actually greater. Sure. What I would say, I think it's going to be useful to really work hard on the nomenclature of clinical research. Again, this won't be the first time it's been tried, but I think it would help people understand. This is all assuming, of course, I'm right, and I may not be, but I do. At age 73, I've developed opinions about things, and I've worked, I think I have an advantage because I've been a busy clinician. I've done the research track. I've done academic leadership. I've been on the boards of drug and device companies, and I've worked for a big tech company and worked in government. So I've seen it all. And I think one important division is research, which is early phase, first in human or most phase 2. That's research that's best done separately from the clinical care system. because you need to measure a whole bunch of things. You're not really asking the question, is this treatment useful in clinical practice? You're asking the question, can we change the probabilities enough to say we should go to the next phase in development of this drug or device? And as has been discussed by the ethicists ad nauseum, there is no benefit to the patient in those phases.
Right.
And I think the discipline of clinical research essentially as a business, where you have people who full-time do that, I think that there's a big place for that. I want to come back to that in a minute. But the big area of clinical research that really needs to be developed is what most people think of when they think of clinical research. I'm doing this study because we need to know what the best treatment is, or the best diagnostic, or the best device. And phase 3 sometimes takes that on, but it's really important for people to understand that the law says all you need to get on the market is demonstrating with adequate and well-controlled trials that the benefits outweigh the risks for some population of people for some period of time. All the questions you'd really want to know about how to use the product in practice are left on the table typically at that point. And we have no system that deals with it. And there is no way you can do that kind of research separately from integrating it with clinical practice. Now, I got misled early on about the generalization of my experience, because you obviously can't take a person that comes in with 10 out of 10 chest pain and a blood pressure of 70 and say, hey, we have a research clinic, why don't you come back tomorrow, we'll do the trial.
Right.
Do it in practice. And we were able to do that to the tune of tens of thousands of people in each clinical trial at a very low cost. It just was the thing to do in the 1980s. And people forget that most of what we tried didn't work. We found a few things that really worked, and now your risk of being dead if you come into a hospital with a heart attack is cut by more than 50%, because we know what to do. So I sort of assume, like, what kind of a really good doctor would say, what I learned in medical school, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm not even interested in making things better. Well, it seems like if you're a really good doctor, it would drive you crazy that most of your decisions, you don't really know that they're right. Right now, in our clinical practice guidelines across the board, that's been looked at very intensively, more than 80% of key recommendations are not based on high quality evidence.
Right.
More than 80%. Now think about that.
That's scary.
I hasten to add, the good news is, if you take biology, clinical experience, expert knowledge, extrapolation from similar things, I think, it's a lot better to have all that than nothing. But there's nothing like having a high quality evidence answering the question. And we don't have that for most of what we do. So we've got to really develop, and the theory of this has been very advanced in the learning health system theory, which is a big focus of the National Academy of Medicine. And it's driven by the fact that we all have electronic health records and claims data, and we're all wearing gadgets of one kind or another and can use cell phones to record how we're doing and how we feel. So the digital environment should lead to a situation where, I don't know if people will be upset about this next statement. Right now, I would say the average Walmart clerk does a lot more research than the average doctor.
Yeah, I can see that.
What you do in Walmart is barcoded and recorded and goes into a database and is constantly analyzed to try to improve the efficiency of the operation and the experience. And also, if you just use the internet, one thing I learned working at Google is that there's a huge amount of A/B testing, which is randomized trials of what the best approach is to get people to spend advertising money, which is
why are clinical trials why are they so hard? Why are they so, you see the stats about the delays, there's not enough physicians doing clinical trials. I mean, seems like we have this access to the same stuff, that a big tech company or even a Walmart does. So, like, why do we struggle so bad?
Well, I feel like we're undergoing this massive family therapy about this, and it goes back to mom and pop years ago, where there were these egregious violations of human rights, Nazi Germany, Tuskegee, et cetera.
Of course.
So this led to an ethics standard that separated the two, with a premise, which is kind of hard for me to even say today, but the premise was that the doctor is always looking out for the best interest of the patient. The fiduciary is to the patient, and the researcher is trying to answer a question. So the patient's well-being is a secondary consideration. And there was a time when I think that was a useful construct, but I think we've just not gotten over it. And I think it's a big mistake. So on the one hand, almost all clinicians now work for corporations. And if you think that there's total independence to be fiduciary to the patient, just ask anybody going through one of our healthcare systems right now and look at what doctors and nurses and pharmacists are saying about their own experiences. And the idea that researchers are not human, I would say the unethical thing to do is to know that you don't know the answer and not offer the patient a chance to answer the question. That is like the highest calling. But we act like, oh, you must be a bad person if you want to know the answer to the question. No, that's how we find out what's most effective. And it's a person giving a sacrifice through consent to participate in a trial at some risk to get the answer. So a result of that division, when we separate it out now, because we're in a country that believes that healthcare is a business, and it's
we sure are.
Early in my career, an expert in clinical research was someone who knew how to design a protocol and think about what should be collected and understood what to analyze and how to do it. Now, an expert in clinical research is someone who knows how to extract the maximum number of dollars from the sponsor in conducting the protocol. And this is what I'm hearing when I'm talking to people, and it's very, very.
You're referring primarily to CROs. Like, is there a problem with the model, like the CRO model?
Yeah, I think, again, like all these things, because I've been in all sectors, I feel like I have an understanding, but also a lot of internal conflict. I mean, the key to my career was developing the DCRI, which is an academic CRO, because it was obvious as it all started with a group of us who had been interns together at UCSF who had gone into cardiology. I was thinking the other day, it's kind of weird we all went into cardiology because 1978, when we were interns, was the peak of the pre-understanding of HIV, and we had wards full of AIDS patients. We didn't know what it was. So you would have thought we'd all gone into infectious disease, but a bunch of us went into cardiology. We just thought we needed to figure out what to do about heart attacks, so we formed a study group. And that grew, and it became obvious if you're going to get the right answers, you did need to systematize the computing environment, the way the data was collected, the way it was analyzed, and that leads to functions that are CRO-like. So I would argue there's nothing wrong with the concept. You have to have it if you're going to do multi-site research. It has to be coordinated. That's true of all multi-site activities of any kind in the human condition. But when it becomes purely financial as a driver, you get into a very weird conundrum where your profitability may be adverse to the real purpose of the effort.
So is this something that's new? I mean, this concept where we're fiscally driven, right? Like you mentioned, researchers were really good at protocols and doing the research, and now it's who can run it most financially efficiently from a researcher side. Doing the CRO model makes sense, but then we get distracted by finance. Is this something new that you've seen progress or change, or is this something that's always kind of been embedded, just not as prevalent?
It's always been part of it. And there were, but it emanates from our basic view in America. We're the only high income country now that has this view that healthcare is not a right.
Right.
And so then it becomes a business. And, so much of our healthcare effort is spent identifying on whom we can make a profit as systems. And it's always justified by the fact that because all the people who you can't make a profit on by law, you still have to care for them in one way. So it's sort of like the cycle that goes on. And so then clinical research goes in that mission, and you're in never-ending arguments about whether it loses money or makes money to the owning institutions.
Do you think if clinical trials were easier to execute at the site level, that would alleviate like the need for, I work at a site, and I see the extra layers that a CRO often interjects because, we know how to follow. There's guidelines, there's FDA guidelines, there's ICH, GCP, but what CROs tend to do are 3 to 4 to 5 steps above that, which creates a complexity that is unmanageable for sites in many ways. And I'm sure you've probably felt this, surely, as a PI in the past. Like, if the process were simpler or easier for physicians to participate in, do you think that would have any sort of, dramatic change?
Absolutely. The early, the trial that really was a breakthrough trial for us was called Augusto. We randomized 40,000 heart attack patients around the world in 14 countries. We had a 3-page case report form. That was it. We paid $300 per patient to the investigator for the trouble of
you're making this up. There's no way.
Administering the drug and measuring some things. We kept it very simple. We wrote 160 papers, mostly in very prestigious journals like New England Journal, JAMA, Lancet. Every data item became a paper, basically, because they were very carefully thought through. And then our whole ethos was design protocols that fit in with clinical practice. Because if you think about sort of how the information system ought to work, you've got, for common diseases at least, you have repetitive branches in your clinical care where decisions need to be made. Like, how do you open the artery in a heart attack? And those are very amenable to asking a particular question, and you don't need to worry about everything else. The question is, which technique do you use to open the artery? Is it a drug or a device? And if it's a device, which is the way it is now, which kind? And so you can design very simple trials that are easy to do. And that's another reason to separate out those phase 1 and 2 trials, because you can't do that there. It's not part of clinical practice.
So where is that gone then? Because I've seen some just wackadoo protocols recently that have a ridiculous number of things they're trying to do. And it's almost like they don't have a question they're trying to answer. They're trying to answer like 12 questions in one protocol. And it's like you're developing this behemoth of a thing that you can't execute well. I can only imagine the data is going to get conflicted too. Like, where is this concept of simplified protocols? I'm just not seeing it anymore.
There's too many elements.
I think the factors can be laid out. And by the way, I have a Substack now, so I'm going to be breaking this down into all of its elements. And
all
I'm
right,
in a
let us know.
now.
We'll put a link. We'll put a link out.
Yeah, at age 73, I'm not looking for the next job, and I'm not looking for an NIH grant or anything. I can say what I want. Substack gives me a chance to say it without having to satisfy reviewers. So I can be right or wrong, and people will judge it. But I think just to enumerate a couple of the factors, one of the factors is what you mentioned with the CROs. The more widgets that are made in a trial, the more money they make. And I had many situations towards the end of my DCRI career where we told the sponsor, we can do this for half the price. We can cut out all these activities. And they said, no, we want all of it. And of course, then what do? You're going to make more money, which for us at an academic CRO or ARO, there is no profit. We plow that back into the institution and support fellows. But another factor is fear of FDA. And this is a really important point that it took me a long time to understand, because first time through FDA, I would preach about, simplifying trials. And people would look at me with blank stares. I mean, I'll also say that Janet Woodcock and Jeff Shuren, Peter Marks' center directors, were also preaching this. But then I realized if you look at what a reviewer sees at the FDA, since 9 out of 10 drugs fail and most devices go through many iterations before the form that really makes it, most of what they do, the vast majority, are small little trials meant to just advance to the next stage or kill the product. And so these larger trials meant to inform practice that I was focused on were just a small part of their overall portfolio. And I think, NIH has not done a good job of picking up, this I'll just call it post-market, but for common diseases, I think it also includes phase 3 of saying, let's answer the questions in a way that really informs practice and design protocols that fit in with this. There are other factors which I'll go through later, but I think those are the two biggest ones. It's a business. Oh yeah, one other to mention, if academics are involved, there's always, I want to write a paper about this or that. So we call that the Christmas tree phenomenon. You start out with a beautiful, pristine Christmas tree, and then everyone puts ornaments on it, and no one wants to take off grandma's ornament.
Don't forget the tinsel.
Yeah, and I mean, to that, I guess in that vein, like we've seen a big rise in like private research sites, and then a lot of M&A site networks now becoming, much bigger. I mean, do you think this is good or bad in general for the clinical research environment? I mean, obviously you've got companies backed by private equity that are driven by profits, but also can operate probably more efficiently than your standard academic medical center. I mean, where's the...
Well, I think in the long run, it's bad. In the short run, it could be good, and bring some discipline to it. But, part of what this is saying is if you separate it out, you can run it more efficiently. Well, okay, if the purpose of a clinical trial is to take a sample of people with a problem and answer the question for the next person that we see who's like this, what's the best treatment? I don't think you have to be too smart to know that you're not getting a very representative sample of people if you're separating it out. What you want to do, if you really want to answer that question, is to sample the population coming through a normal, regular clinical practice. And so I think that's why it's bad. But in the short term, at least we'll get some things done, which seems to be a big problem now. I can't believe it. Every single item that we preached about, and I was on committees about for years, seems to have gotten worse. The contracts take longer. The consent forms are longer. People are still spending, I'm learning, I can't believe this, 3 to 4 months on CDAs for protocol. Why should there be confidentiality of a human experimental protocol? I don't even know why that should ever be done.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. So how do we get more? I mean, how do we get more community practice, or should more community practice? I agree. I think seeing patients at their within the practice makes a lot of sense to me. But it's a pain in the ass if you're a doctor who doesn't have the support of an academic medical center, or smart enough to figure it out yourself. Again, to your point, CDAs, contracts and budgets, regulatory. I'm scared of the FDA. I mean, what can we do to encourage, more community involvement?
Yeah, I used to say, I mean, who wouldn't like to participate in clinical research as an investigator? You get to spend endless hours filling out forms. You get berated by the CRO monitor. You could lose money, and you could go to jail if you get it wrong. Other than that, it's really
what's
great.
not to love.
And well, I think another thing I failed to mention, which is pertinent to a lot of what we've discussed, is we have this thing in the U.S. where the health systems and medical people feel compelled to put on the aura that they actually know the right treatment. So if you have to stop and say, I don't really know the right treatment, and let's talk about a clinical trial, you worry that, well, the patient and family are just going to go to the place next door, and where the doctor knows what to do. And so I think that is a very significant factor. But you actually said the most important thing. You said doesn't have the backing of their health system. And so as long as we run a health system where profit is king and administrators are more powerful than clinicians, this is what we're going to have. And, some really cutting edge systems will solve the problem. Some areas like cancer, where there's a huge amount of money compared to others, and also a will on the part of the patient advocates, they'll do okay. But the rest of it is going to do badly, and it's very concerning. So we have to, I don't see how we can separate this from what the health system itself is doing. I mean, think about this. What clinicians are hearing is we are running a non-learning health system. We don't really want to learn whatever we knew yesterday. That's all we're going to know. And what we're going to really work on is how can we use algorithms to figure out how to optimize our profit within that. That's what people are hearing.
Even within the health systems, because we partner with health systems to provide, infrastructure to do research. But I mean, we hear it all the time. Like if they're being paid in RVUs, like they don't want to take away time to go see a research patient or talk to a CRA or review a lab report that's not contributing, to their base pay or to their quota, whatever it may be. So it's extremely frustrating.
Well, let's just look at it as a challenge. This time around at FDA, I came across this saying, "A winner is a loser who keeps on trying." And there was a famous boxer who I'm sure people have said that from different times, but it is frustrating, but I think it is a noble mission, learning in healthcare about how to improve things.
So if we're in the healthcare environment we're in, right? Like this is kind of where we're sitting now. Do we see the path forward fixing that? Or do we see the path forward for research going to different countries, going to the EU, going to APAC, going to different regions that do have a different healthcare environment? Or do we fix what we got? Or I mean, how do you see this moving forward successfully?
My thinking about that is unfortunately too complicated because, I mean, on the one hand, we're 4% of the world's population. So we actually do pretty well relative to our size. On the other hand, if you just looked at it from the point of view of medical products, we account for something like 75% of the profit of medical products. We could talk a long time about whether that's good or bad. The industry clearly, the medical products industry is clearly increasing its efforts to develop its systems in other countries. Yeah. And other countries are catching on. The UK just today announced an incentive program over the course of 10 years, specifically to rev up clinical trial recruitment in the UK. They see it as a national asset, learning, attracting industry and innovation, all the things that I'm sure the three of us would agree on.
I got my passport up to date, so
there are many reasons you might think about that, but we
agree.
So, but even if you argue that for the medical products industry, the right size of the U.S. has probably been out of proportion for a long time because we've had a dominant financial position. So people have had to work in the U.S. whether they like it or not. We got our own needs. We're spending $5 trillion a year on healthcare. As I've already made the case, most of the time we don't know what we're doing. We have ideas and we're not bad, but we have almost a 5-year shorter life expectancy than other high-income countries. So we need a system that sorts out what the best interventions are. And we are obviously spending a lot of money on things that are not helpful. How else could you spend $5 trillion and have the worst results of any high income country?
You're really bad at what you do.
Yeah, well, something like that.
Well, and so, I mean, look, you painted a little bit of a bleak picture. I'm not going to lie. All right. But, we have a lot of sponsors, CROs, sites watch this, right? Like, these are people who we are passionate about, like what we're doing. It's sort of in the trenches, so to speak. So, like, what would you say? Like, what can we do as a, clinical research community to like make, maybe we want this to be better, like it's.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked it that way, because I'm not bleak at all, really. I just think it's always better to be realistic.
Of course.
But
I've been accused of the same, so it's okay.
Yeah. There is low hanging fruit for whoever can put it together now, because the demand is going to be there. I am on a tear right now. Watch my Substack, but it's been one of the interesting things that's happened is academic medical centers calling me asking for advice, because they know that my career was built on this combination of industry, medical products industry, and NIH. By the way, I always call it medical products industry because the healthcare delivery industry is humongous compared to the medical products industry. And if you don't believe that that has an influence on all this, hopefully you do believe it after this discussion.
Right.
But if you can just identify eligible people, cut your contracting time, provide reasonable consents, and maybe work together with a few other places to provide a attractive spot for industry sponsors, you can really both do good and make money right now. And then, I'm hoping we'll see what this new administration does, but I know there are big cutbacks in the NIH budget, which partly I'm here to argue about here in Boston today, which is, really getting hurt by this. But still, what's being talked about is we need, Maha says we're going down the wrong path. We got to figure out what's really effective, and it's not just pharma, but it's also our diets and chemicals in the food and things that are going to require clinical research. So I think the opportunity is going to be there with government too. But at the core of it is if what we do is to say we're going to optimize the profit and try to reduce the legal risk to the maximum extent on each individual protocol, those are places that I predict will not do well.
Fair. Well, hey, we're getting down here to the last 15 minutes or so. Any other specific questions, Denali?
No, I think we've talked about a lot of them. Dr. Califf, anything else that you want to kind of get out there to the clinical research community?
I would just say this is a time, if you really believe in structured learning, through which I think history has shown, if you just guess about medical interventions, you're going to be wrong a lot of the time. It's not obvious, partly because when you do an intervention, the effects are systemic in the entire person, in the environment that they're in over time. And, I learned about that early in my career with bypass surgery, which was what I was originally looking at. Angioplasty didn't exist. So, but what happened in bypass surgery is you would essentially kill a couple of people out of every 100 in the first day because there was a operative mortality. Then if you look 6 months later, people who had severe coronary disease did a lot better over time. And there's no way an individual doctor can figure that out, or a health system. You need to have randomized trials to figure it out. So if you believe in that, I'd say band together. And things are bad enough that if you just did a little bit better, you'd have an edge. And if people started doing better, maybe the whole thing can gain steam. Also, the scary, just to give a scary scenario, again, part of the situation I'm in here in Boston, I've got a fireside with Jake Auchincloss, who's a member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts, tomorrow, and some biotech executives. I've been using Humpty Dumpty as the analogy for what's going on right now. I mean, the system is descending into disarray. And they're going to, unless something changes quickly, there are going to be massive layoffs at academic medical centers. And if the Medicaid budget goes through as projected, pretty big layoffs in health systems.
Yeah.
And I think at some point people will say, we got to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And I think this integrated learning and practice and more of healthcare as a right is what needs to happen, and an explanation to people that this is how we figure out what to do, and it's a good thing to do. One other little thing I haven't mentioned that I know you're aware of, the surveys continue to show that if people's doctors or nurses or pharmacists, whoever they trust that they're getting healthcare from, say, it's good for you to participate in this clinical trial, the vast majority of people will do it. So it really comes back to this: how do we support the clinical practice to participate? And we need to keep trying. There's a lot at stake. You started with Coach K. One thing about Coach K, he did not accept being anything but the best. And here we are. How can we have a country like this that's in last place? This is pathetic. We've got to do better.
Yeah, we really do.
Yeah, I couldn't say any better. Well, onward. And I echo, I think, your point too about, and one of the questions we had here at the very end, talking about how we can better educate the general public on the value of participating in a clinical trial. And I think I've seen it, time and time again, when we're integrated within a practice and they're hearing it from their doctor, their nurse, not a random phone call from a standalone, site. I think there's a lot more trust, and then you can start to, educate. Do you is there anything else you would add to that? I mean, I think that's a huge
just a word.
undervalued.
I think this is the key to a lot of things. And I came, there was so much trouble at FDA with public trust in the midst of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
And a lot of people said, well, you just need to communicate with 360 million people. And you need to do it in a situation where the court said you can't use social media with the things that I had learned at Google actually work. And so my conclusion, and I think this is just as true for clinical trials, the real focus ought to be on the frontline clinicians for the reason that you gave. And I think it seems to me that if we've proven one thing, it's that fancy AI algorithms, of course, they can identify people who might be eligible for a trial, but they don't get the enrollment done.
No.
So this is not a matter of automation. Automation can help, but it really is a matter of fortifying the frontline people that are trusted by the population to do the right thing.
I mean, this is another, soapbox that we've talked about a couple of times on this show, but it talks about, AI is great. AI is a tool, but it is just a tool. It is not a solution. And I think getting back to you can be a great resource, but there's the people element of it that I think is just, it's not fun or sexy. So people disregard it when that's the core of what needs to be focused on.
I feel like often people don't grasp what's really going on here. You're talking about doing an experiment on a fellow human being, and it's as in many ways, and it takes a team of people. There is no single individual that controls it. Just to start, we're having a lot of discussions now about China versus U.S. in phase 1. Well, just to start in the U.S., you need agreement of someone who's willing to pay the freight, the investors. You need a manufacturer who can make the product in a way that's safe. You need the FDA to agree. You need an IRB to agree, and you need an investigator to agree. Then you need a person that's willing to consent. This is a huge social, complicated activity that really needs to be supported and can't be parsed out as just a business. That's my view of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But being an efficient business is a part of it.
Well, right. And having the tech and the tools to do that is paramount and critical. I would, you need to have good tech. You need to have collaboration and communication within tech, but there still is the human element that isn't and never will be that.
Very good. All right. Well, Dr. Califf, thank you so much for coming on. We'll plug your Substack. Make sure to get us a link, and we'll post it in our show notes. I think we'll be back tomorrow.
Yeah. Yep.
With
Laura O'Donnell from GSK. Yeah.
From GlaxoSmithKline. So again, thanks everybody for watching. Dr. Califf again. Thank you, and good luck later today or tomorrow.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.